Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to the Slang of Ages podcast. I'm your host, Preston Frazier. And of course, this is Slang of Ages podcast on YouTube. This will be a very short episode, but we're going to be talking briefly about the album Power Station Living in Fear. And this is episode number 8, season 5. So we're halfway through the 5th season of the podcast. So welcome. Again, like, share, and subscribe. Feel free to enjoy it and invite your friends. The more listeners we have, the longer we can keep doing this. And of course, check out the Slang of Ages podcast on your podcatcher. Also, check it out on my website. You can go to slangofages.com and you can find the podcast. I would appreciate you again liking, sharing, and subscribing. So, Living in Fear, Power Station. This is the Power Station album that most of you don't know existed. This was actually the second Power Station album, the first one being called, of course, The Power Station. And this album was released in 1996. So I think it was 8 years or so after the original Power Station album. This album was not a big hit. It didn't chart United States. It did have one single, and it also was a change from the original Power Station album. You may recall that the original Power Station album included John Taylor and Andy Taylor, both from Duran Duran. It included the great drummer from Chic, Tony Thompson, and Robert Palmer, who was a fantastic singer, songwriter in his own right. They all got together under the direction of producer Bernard Edwards and produced the first Power Station, which had 3 big hits. The band never toured together as a group, however, because Robert Palmer went on to do a solo career. He had a big success with some great hits and didn't want to tour with the Power Station. So the band got Michael DeBarge in to sub for Robert Palmer, and it kind of went to hell after that. They broke up for a while. John Taylor went back to Duran Duran. Andy Taylor moved from Duran Duran after the Notorious album to a solo career. And Tony Thompson actually went on to be the drummer for Led Zeppelin. Yes, I said Led Zeppelin. You may remember at Live Aid, he was one of the 2 drummers for Led Zeppelin in Live Aid. He was actually one keeping time. And he was scheduled to do some recording with Led Zeppelin. He got to England, got in a cab, and was in a very bad accident. And they decided at that point, Led Zeppelin decided they weren't going to continue. So they thought it was an omen. So they didn't get together. And then, like I said, Power Station was put on hiatus. They weren't thinking of getting back together. But then Andy Taylor and John Taylor found some time in their schedules. Andy Taylor had gone through a pretty traumatic time with his then wife, and they were getting a divorce. And I'm sorry, John Taylor, get the Taylors mixed up. And John Taylor also was attempting to recover from addictions that he had. So he decided instead of doing the album, the second album, Power Station album, but he would go into rehab. So he helped co-write the album with Tony Thompson, Robert Palmer, and Andy Taylor, but John Taylor did not play in the album. So who played bass on the album, you ask? Well, obviously, the producer, Bernard Edwards. And if you know anything about music, you know that Bernard Edwards was a wonderful bass player, singer, songwriter in his own right. And the other half of the band, Chic, because really the composition part was Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, with Tony Thompson on drums and a bunch of other session musicians. So you had a fantastic bass player in the fold. You had a really eager lead guitarist in the name of Andy Taylor. You had Robert Palmer, who came back to the Power Station, was really eager to the project. Again, Bernard Edwards produced it. Tony Thompson held down the drum seat, and they did a fantastic album. And then things went to hell after that. So Living in Fear has 11 songs, including a cover of George Harrison's Taxman. There are 2 different versions of this album, which I'll talk about in the podcast. One which has the great song, the Marvin Gaye song "Let's Get It On," and then another song which was an original composition by the band called Power Trippin'. I would seek out both versions, but the song Power Trippin' is one of the best Power Station songs they've ever released, and it's kind of hard to find. So if you could get that, get it. And that was on the US release. And I'm not sure if it's still available. I don't think it's on iTunes. Again, the album did not sell particularly well. It didn't hit the United States. They had one hit from the album, well, one video from the album, which was a song She Can Rock It, which is a great upbeat funky song. Bernard Edwards really just plays his ass off with Tony Thompson. And then Andy Taylor gets to do some great power chords and some great solos. And part of the reason Andy Taylor wanted to get out of Duran Duran was because he wasn't allowed much freedom in terms of guitar playing. He felt that Nick Rose controlled the band and it was too keyboard based. So here he got to stretch his legs, but really it was all for naught because the album didn't sell very well. And by the time they were about to tour the album, tragedy struck. I believe Tony Thompson died first. He had cancer. I think it was colon cancer, but I'm not really sure. So he died of cancer. He couldn't afford treatment in the United States, so his friends got together and tried to raise some money for him, but it was too late and he died of cancer. The next tragedy from the album really was Bernard Edwards. He was on tour with Chic with Nile Rodgers in Japan. He had a fever and he had a cold, what he thought was a cold during the tour, and it turned out he had pneumonia and he died during the tour. He at one point during the tour, he was playing bass, he passed out right on the beat, then he woke up, the song was still playing, he got up and started to play. But what the tragedy is that now Rogers found him in his hotel room on the bed. He was ice cold. He had died of, like I said, pneumonia and related pneumonia. And then, of course, after the tour, Robert Palmer died of a heart attack. Robert Palmer, in his early days, was a heavy drinker. He had kind of cleaned up a little bit, but the drinking probably contributed to his heart problems, and he died. So, of the members who made Living in Fear, only Andy Taylor is around. And if you follow Duran Duran, you know that Andy Taylor was recently diagnosed with cancer, and I believe a stage 4 prostate cancer, I think, but it's stage 4 cancer. So he's hanging on there, but he's the only member of the Power Station around since John Taylor left the band. John Taylor's back with Duran Duran, and he's just played on their album Dance Macabre, as did Andy Taylor and Warren Cucurilla, who was Andy Taylor's guitar replacement. Any case, back to Living in Fear. If you can find the album, find it. It's a wonderful album. If you don't believe me, I challenge you. I think you have to get this album if you're a Duran Duran fan, a Power Station fan, or a Chic fan, or Robert Palmer fan. Any case, check out the Sling of Ages podcast. It's available on your podcatcher. Like, share, and subscribe. I'll have a donate button on my website very soon. That's at www.slangofages.com. Appreciate you listening to this on YouTube. Check out my podcast and have a wonderful time rocking out. Thanks.